Welcome, Alan Dershowitz. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So, did I get this right? You're talking about now that the Supreme Court might start leaning towards security over free speech in the coming years.
Yeah, look, I pride myself on never. It does. I pride myself on never making predictions based on what I want to happen. That's what Lawrence Tribe does. That's what others on the left do, and that's why they're always wrong. I make predictions based on my analysis of trends. This is not a trend I approve of, but it's a trend I see coming. I see coming it in the area of defamation. I see it coming in the area of incitement. I think that the Brandenburg decision was written during a time of relative calm, and we weren't seeing the kinds of incitements to violence that we saw that probably led to the burning of Jews in Boulder, Colorado, and the shooting of these two innocent people in Washington, D.C., and other kinds of things. Look, I have a lot of
hang on just a second. Alan, you just said, and I find this amazing that you said this. You just said it happened in a time of relative calm. It was 1969 that this case came down to the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken, which is not really a calm year. But can you explain what the Brandenburg case is?
Sure.
What it was?
Brandenburg was a Nazi who was making horrible, horrible speeches, but he wasn't inciting anybody directly. And the Nazis in those days had no influence, no power. They weren't getting people to do things. The people who were creating problems then were during the Vietnam War, people from the left. I represented a lot of them. And I represented people who disrupted the Democratic Convention in 1968. The Chicago Seven, and other people like that. And I saw with my own eyes that some of these people who started as disruptors and violent confrontationists and people pushing and shoving and breaking property and stuff like that ultimately became murderers, like Kathy Boudin, who ended up being responsible for the killing of two policemen, or the weathermen who planted bombs and killed people. And then their leaders became, prominent spokesmen of the left, professors at various places. So I saw that, and what I'm seeing now is a different kind of quantity. And what we're seeing it is with the globalize the Intifada and Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Those are calls for violence, and under the current Brandenburg case, they're protected speech. I think they should still be protected speech. But my prediction is that when the next case comes up to the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court, I think they may take a more security-oriented point of view and say, wait a minute, the incitement doesn't have to be so direct. It could be a little bit more indirect, and let the jury decide that issue. So I'm concerned about that. In my book, The Preventive State, I have a whole chapter on free speech and how free speech can sometimes cause violence, but that it's not proper to deny free speech in order to prevent violence. We have to think of better ways of preventing violence. And in the preventive state, I come up, I think, with better ways than constraining free speech.
Because I'm with you on this. This really disturbs me. When I read this article from you yesterday, the story from you yesterday, I needed to talk to you because I'm like, this is horrible. This goes beyond cancel culture. This is now the government being able to come in and say, nope.
Yeah.
Right. That's really bad.
Yeah. Look, there are so many preventive mechanisms we use that have effects on free speech, even deportation. Deportation obviously denies the deported person the right to speak freely in this country. Now, of course, under the Constitution, a citizen has the most free speech rights, a green card holder second most, visa holders almost no free speech rights. They can be deported if they say things that are contrary to the interests of the United States. They're just guests in the country. And so, I think we're going to see lots of movement in this area because we're going to see a lot more violence. Let me tell you what happened to me. The day before the killings in the District of Columbia, this one Christian boy and Jewish woman who were killed working for the embassy. The day after that, I was getting an honorary degree at a college in Florida. And the security people from the college came up to me and said, we're terrified that there might be a copycat attempt to kill you because you're a prominent spokesman for pro-Israel points of view. And so they created a whole security thing around me where they created an escape plan. They had policemen with machine guns and with bulletproof glass to protect me. And I have redoubled my security. And I think we're going to see more copycat crimes. I think that Hamas wants to see violence in the United States. That's their goal, to get more people to kill Jews, Christians, and others in the United States. And I think they're probably going to succeed unless there are some preventive steps that are taken. Now, the preventive steps should not include diminutions of legitimate free speech under the Constitution.
I tell you, I see what the government is doing and how AI is, in Silicon Valley is playing a big role with the Pentagon and CIA and everything else. And I am really, really concerned if there is another big event like a 9/11. I fear Americans are just going to run to that kind of stuff. And then we're in a trap that I don't think we get out of.
Yeah, but that's what history shows. And in my book, The Preventive State, I show that there's a common phenomenon. We underreact and we don't prevent. We didn't prevent Pearl Harbor. We didn't prevent 9/11. Israel didn't prevent October 7th. Then what happened? After we failed to prevent Pearl Harbor, we put 110,000 innocent Japanese Americans in camps in order to prevent them from doing it again. They never would have done it again. We overreacted. After 9/11, we created the Patriot Act, which gave the government too much power to prevent a recurrence of that. And, reasonably people disagree about Israel, but a lot of people think that Israel, for failure to prevent October 7th, which they could have done, they had the intelligence, may have overreacted in Gaza. I'm not agreeing with that. I'm just telling you, historically, there's a phenomenon. It starts with under-prediction and ends up with overreaction to the event that was not predicted and prevented. That's one of the theses of my book.
So what should we expect, and how do we prepare ourselves so we don't go down that road?
Well, first of all, we do a lot more preparation and prevention. We try desperately to use what the resources are available. I'll give you an example. The young man who burned those people in Boulder, Colorado, he was here illegally. He had overstayed his visa. There's nothing wrong with using artificial intelligence and computer technology to keep track of people who are here illegally. And once he overstayed his visa, action could have been taken, and maybe this crime could have been prevented. So I think there are preventive steps that are consistent with the Constitution and with free speech that can be taken to avoid the cataclysmic events. I'm going to give you another horrible example that we're working on right now. Should the United States and Israel bomb Iran's nuclear facilities? We know they're planning to create an atomic bomb, and we know that in the 1930s, if France and England had prevented Germany from building up its army, they would have saved 50 million lives, but we didn't know it then. And so these are the kinds of preventive decisions. But there's no free lunch. Every preventive decision entails some diminution of liberty. And, Benjamin Franklin was correct when he said those who would deny essential liberties to secure a little bit more security deserve neither. But the question is, can we deny a little bit of non-essential liberty to prevent major cataclysmic events? I'll give you an example. If before 9/11 we had arrested 10 people and prevented 9/11, and 4 of the people arrested were improperly arrested and spent 2 months in jail improperly, that's probably a trade-off that's worth it.
What are non-essential liberties?
Well, there's a continuum. Obviously, free speech is the most essential liberty. Privacy is a matter of degree. And, keeping track of people who are here illegally does in some way invade their right of privacy, but in a small way, because they really don't have a right to be there at all. Liberty is a continuum, and we have to make sure that we don't go after fundamental liberties. As I think, look, what could be worse than putting 110,000 Japanese Americans in camps and denying them their right to earn a living?
I know.
We did that for 3 years in the Supreme Court with liberal justices. Earl Warren was the governor of California at the time. Hugo Black was on the Supreme Court. They all agreed with that. Only a couple of justices, Justice Jackson, didn't agree with it. But Americans were outraged at Pearl Harbor as they were outraged at 9/11. And when you're outraged, you don't think carefully.
I know. And that's a little terrifying. Just looking at what's coming around the world. And then seeing the growth of AI and what can be done, it's a little frightening that we'll jump immediately to, yes, we need a super duper Patriot Act. I think that's right.
Alan, and we need a super duper Patriot Act that denies free speech. That's the first thing, because people hate free speech. You know, the vast majority of Americans, even though they claim to support the First Amendment, believe in free speech for me, but not for thee. I used to, when I taught my class on the First Amendment, I would ask students, how many people believe free speech for everybody? And everybody would raise a hand. And then I would say, but what about pornography? Well, some hands went down. What about, and then I would do a lot, what about anti-Semitism? Some hands would go down. What about bigotry against Catholics? Some hands would go down. By the end of the class, there were no hands up. Everybody had an exception.
You were the youngest full professor at Harvard, at the law school. You're emeritus now at Harvard. What do you see happening to Harvard and this war, this battle between the Trump administration and Harvard?
Look, it started way before the Trump administration. Harvard started on its decline probably more than a decade ago by adopting DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which lowered standards for admission, lowered standards for faculty, and turned us into a mediocre university. We are a mediocre university, Harvard. The Latin term shouldn't be veritas; it should be mediocritas. We have lowered our standards. This is not about Jews. This is or about Israel. This is about lowering the standards for DEI. We've also adopted a concept called intersectionality, which says that the world's divided into two groups: the oppressors, those are Americans, whites, Jews, and the oppressed, people of color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's permeated the faculty. Third, we've created these crazy departments of gender studies, of critical race theory, of Southeast Asian this, and these programs are not academic; they're political. They have agendas, and they have destroyed the university. And so I think we need to fundamentally root out these hard left, polemical, non-academic causes. And of course, there's anti-Semitism as well. And so I generally support giving Harvard a kick in the rear end. I have a new book coming out after my book, The Preventive State, in the summer, and it's called Trump to Harvard, Go Fund Yourself. And it's all about how it's important to have targeted defunding. Schools like the Divinity School, the school that teaches Christianity, has become the cesspool of anti-Semitism. The Public Health Department, a cesspool of anti-Semitism. The Carr Center for Human Rights has become a place of human wrongs. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it should be targeted. We shouldn't be denying visas to everybody. We should be denying them to people who would come and cause terrible disruptions on the campus. So there's a lot of work to be done. And the president of Harvard's a good person. He's trying his best. But there are hard left people on the faculty who care more about promoting their progressive agendas than about teaching students. You know, in 60 years at Harvard, I never once expressed a personal view in class. Never once. Students didn't know what my views were on capital punishment, on Israel, you name it. None of it. I never expressed a personal view in class. My job was not to teach them what to think, but to teach them how to think. If they were a conservative, I want them to go out as a smarter conservative. If they were liberal, I want them to be a better liberal. So that's my job, but that's not what's going on at Harvard today. Today it's becoming a place of indoctrination and propaganda. What
do you say to, there's this big thing going around now that, you know, I was I was just a year away from curing tuberculosis, and the government pulled all of its funding out of my Harvard research, and now these children are all going to die. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, first, it's an overstatement. Harvard has $53 billion that it can devote to curing cancer. But clearly, I mean, for example, one of the first reactions when they cut off the funds from Harvard Research was one of the researchers made an announcement saying, "Oh, my God, the mice are now going to die. We can't afford to feed the mice." You know how much it costs to feed a mice on a given day? 11 cents. 11 cents a day to feed a mouse. And so there's a lot of overstatement. But I do think that we have to have only targeted, and we should not be cutting back on research at all.
Alan Dershowitz, I'd love to do a podcast with you, Alan, about the preventative state.
Sure.
You're always right on top of it. Thank you so much, Alan Dershowitz. Again, the name of the book is The Preventative State. Harvard Law School professor emeritus and host of The Dersh Show.